Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the person who saves your life doesn't wear a cape. They whisper your name when the world has already given up on you. Imagine being awake inside your own body, paralyzed and powerless, hearing your future being negotiated like a business deal. No voice, no defense, just silence, and the quiet ache of being forgotten. But what if one stranger's voice, steady and sincere, became the only thing that kept you anchored to the edge of life? This is a story about trust shattered and rebuilt, about love born not in grand gestures, but in the quiet defiance of showing up, again and again. A powerful tale that asks, what would you do if you discovered your coma wasn't the only thing threatening your life? Stay with us as we unravel a story of betrayal, resilience, and a kind of love that doesn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. The morning shift at Mercy Hill Medical Center began, as it always did, with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the mechanical rhythm of ventilators humming low like a lullaby for the unconscious. Dr. Ethan Marshall moved through the halls with practiced grace, his dark blue scrubs wrinkled just enough to betray the hours he'd stayed past his shift the night before. He paused for a moment outside room 507, where a thin sliver of September sunlight fell across the floor like a quiet omen. Something in his gut tightened. He was a man who trusted instinct more than protocol. For 6 years, Ethan had made the neurology ICU his world, a place where silence could mean hope or heartbreak, and where life often hung by a breath no wider than a strand of thought. He had learned not just to treat, but to witness, to hold space for families and patients when time stretched painfully thin. But room 507 was different. Room 507 held a woman the entire hospital knew by name, though few had spoken to her. Avery Monroe, tech magnate, billionaire heiress, media icon, was now nothing more than a fragile body connected to machines, her golden hair fanned out like broken light on the pillow. The crash 3 months ago had made headlines, young billionaire in critical condition after high-speed collision, but the noise of the outside world had died down. People moved on, except Ethan. He came every day, not because of who she was, but because he saw what she could still be. He spoke to her, even though she never responded, about the changing leaves, about the taste of black coffee on rainy mornings, about a book he hated but couldn't stop reading. It had become ritual, a sacred rhythm. He called her Avery, not the Monroe girl, and changed her bandages with a tenderness that even the nurses noted in silence. He wasn't sure why he cared so much, until he found himself thinking about her even when he wasn't at the hospital. There were rumors, of course, that Ethan was developing feelings for a woman who didn't know he existed, that he was chasing a miracle to cover something he couldn't fix in himself. But he said nothing. Because buried under his clinical calm was something he didn't talk about. The night his younger brother died in a hospital, eerily similar to this one, while Ethan, then a second-year resident, watched helplessly from the other side of the glass. He'd made a vow that night, never again. He would not leave anyone feeling alone. "Good morning, Avery," he said now, as he stepped inside the quiet room, the monitor blinking steadily beside her. "The leaves are turning outside. I think you'd like that." His voice was low, intimate without presumption. "You strike me as someone who sees the beauty in transitions, even the painful ones." He removed the bandage from her arm with practiced hands. There was a faint rash from the IV line, and he made a mental note to adjust the tubing. "I read this study yesterday," he continued softly, "suggesting coma patients might hear more than we think. I hope you've heard me." What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that Avery Monroe had been listening. For weeks. Trapped in a body that refused to move, every word Ethan spoke had been a lifeline tossed into the void. His voice had become her only constant, something she clung to when the rest of her world blurred into black. She memorized the timbre of his tone, the cadence of his laugh, the way he always paused before saying her name. Inside her, something had begun to stir. A battle between her will and her broken biology. She had screamed silently, sobbed in stillness. But now, something shifted. Ethan's touch felt warmer than usual, his words sharper, closer. Her fingers twitched, her throat itched with unused breath. "Ethan," she whispered. He froze. For one breathless second, he thought he had imagined it. Then her eyes opened, blue, dazed, blinking against the harsh overhead light. He dropped the bandage. "Avery?" His voice cracked. "I've been hearing you," she said, her voice raspy, broken at the edges. "Every day." His heart hammered in his chest as the call button lit red beneath his palm. Alarms went off, footsteps thundered down the hallway, but Ethan couldn't look away from her face. Her lips trembled, her eyes welled, and in them he saw something more terrifying than a code blue. A human soul clawing its way back from the edge. Doctors swarmed, nurses rushed in, monitors beeped louder, but Avery kept her gaze locked on Ethan. "You're the only one who talked to me like I was still me." Dr. Caroline Trent, the head of neurology, examined her with clinical disbelief. "She's fully responsive," she said later in a hushed voice. "Cognitively intact. It shouldn't be possible, but here we are." In the following days, Avery's recovery stunned the medical community. Reporters camped outside the hospital. The story went viral. "Billionaire awakens from coma after doctor's daily talks." Everyone wanted a quote, a soundbite, a fairy tale. But behind closed doors, something far more complex was unfolding. Because Avery hadn't just woken up to her own story. She'd woken up remembering everything, including conversations from her hospital room at night, whispers she was never meant to hear. A visiting family member arguing about inheritance. A nurse who joked that her coma was the longest board meeting in history, and something darker. A power of attorney form nearly signed in her name. Someone, somewhere, had not expected her to wake up, and now she had. What if the person who saved your life is the only one you can trust in a world that expected you to disappear? How do you rebuild a life when you suspect it was being stolen piece by piece while you slept? Avery Monroe was awake. But the real danger was just beginning. In part 2, she starts to uncover the secrets whispered around her bed and realizes she might have woken up just in time. 3 days after waking, Avery Monroe stared at the ceiling of her hospital room and realized something that chilled her far more than the machines that had kept her alive. Her body had healed faster than her trust. Physically, she was recovering at a pace that amazed her doctors. But mentally, emotionally, something was off. She couldn't shake the fragments of voices she had heard while trapped in her coma. The cold, calculating tone of her Uncle Raymond, muttering about legal control, the dry detachment in her cousin Harper's voice as she asked a nurse how long Avery's medical directive could remain unsigned before a trustee could step in. The words had floated through the fog of her mind back then, like oil on water, but now they burned with clarity. Someone had tried to erase her while she slept. And the worst part? She still didn't know who. Avery had spent her adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Investment partners, political fundraisers, romantic interests, journalists. She had built firewalls not just around her technology empire, but around her heart. But nothing had prepared her for the particular kind of betrayal that came from blood. Now, those same family members were suddenly affectionate, texting and calling and sending flowers, spinning a glossy narrative to the media. Avery's accident had brought the Monroes closer than ever. What a headline. Ethan saw through it immediately. He had noticed her flinch when Harper entered the room and called her darling. He saw the way Avery's eyes tracked every visitor, not with warmth, but with calculated silence, as though she was trying to solve an equation no one else knew existed. One afternoon, as the sun spilled into the room and the hospital's usual rhythms quieted, he sat beside her, a cup of lukewarm tea in his hand. "You're not sleeping," he said softly, "and it's not just the pain." Avery hesitated. Then, "Ethan, when I was unconscious, I heard things, conversations. I know someone was trying to take control of my estate. I just don't know how far it went." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands trembled. "They thought I'd never wake up." Ethan leaned forward, tension tightening his jaw. "Do you know who?" "Not exactly, but my uncle was pushing for medical power of attorney. My cousin, she asked about guardianship. It was all happening around me, like I was a corpse they hadn't bothered to bury." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with measured calm, "Do you want me to help you find out?" She looked at him, that same piercing gaze she'd once used to dismantle boardroom lies and market manipulation. "I don't know who to trust, but I trust you." The words hit him harder than he expected. Not because they were romantic, though something between them simmered quietly, undeniably, but because trust, for Avery, was currency rarer than gold. Later that evening, while reviewing her records, Avery found something small but jarring. A change in her legal emergency contact form dated 6 weeks after her accident, authorizing Raymond Monroe to make financial decisions in case of irreversible neurological decline. The signature wasn't hers. It wasn't even a passable forgery, but it had been quietly approved and filed. Someone inside the hospital had helped push it through. That night, Ethan returned to her room long after visiting hours ended, his badge granting him access. Avery showed him the form. His face darkened. This wasn't a clerical error. Someone wanted this buried. "We need proof," she said. Ethan nodded, but there was conflict in his eyes. "If I investigate this from the inside, I risk violating hospital protocol, patient files, internal authorizations. If I dig too deep, I could lose my license." Avery looked at him carefully. "I'm not asking you to break the law." "I know, but I might choose to anyway." The silence between them stretched, weighted with implication. Avery felt a strange ache bloom in her chest. Not fear, something more complicated. Gratitude. Guilt. A dawning realization that Ethan wasn't just a man who had spoken to her while she lay still. He was someone willing to risk everything for the truth. But as the weeks unfolded, things began to shift. A nurse who had been friendly to Avery was suddenly transferred without explanation. A sealed envelope containing the surveillance logs from the ICU disappeared from Ethan's desk. And then came the anonymous message. "Let it go. Some people don't wake up a second time." Ethan read the message 3 times, each word landing like a nail in his spine. He didn't tell Avery at first. He didn't want to frighten her. But when she caught him staring at his phone in grim silence and asked what was wrong, he handed it to her without a word. Her expression didn't change as she read it, but something behind her eyes did. "I'm not afraid of them," she said finally. "They already took everything from me once. I won't let them do it again." What would you do if the people meant to protect you were the ones orchestrating your downfall? And when loyalty is the most dangerous gamble of all, who would you risk everything for? The deeper they dig, the more dangerous the truth becomes. And someone, maybe more than one, is determined to silence Avery Monroe for good. The next chapter begins with a name neither of them expected. Avery stood in the doorway of her penthouse apartment in Manhattan, the skyline behind her glowing gold with late afternoon light, the same hue as her hair had once been before the accident stripped it of its luster. Now, even dressed in an elegant navy blouse and tailored pants, she felt like a ghost walking through a life that had been hijacked. The silence of her own home, once a retreat, now pulsed with secrets. Every photo frame, every untouched glass on the marble kitchen island whispered a question. Who had hoped she'd never come back? The investigation, silent but meticulous, had uncovered more than Avery was ready for. The anonymous message had been traced to a burner phone connected to someone inside her family's law firm. A digital trail led to an account in Harper's name, used to pay a hospital administrator under the guise of a consulting fee. And the signature on the legal authorization matched not just a forged hand, but an algorithm, one tied to a company Raymond Monroe had quietly acquired 6 months before the accident. Her uncle had tried to automate her silence. Her cousin had tried to fund it, and they almost got away with it. When she confronted them, quietly, privately, they didn't deny it. Not exactly. Harper stared at her with a cool smirk and said, "You have no idea how hard it is to carry the weight of your absence. We had to protect what you built." Raymond, calm as ever, added, "Legacy is fragile, Avery. We did what we had to. You were gone." "You mean I was convenient to erase," she'd replied, her voice brittle but unwavering. What stunned her most wasn't their betrayal, but how unsurprised she felt. The people she had once feared losing were never truly hers to begin with. She walked out of that meeting without another word. That night, She sat across from Ethan in a quiet bistro tucked between brownstones, the kind of place where no one wore suits and no one knew who she was. He took her hand as he always did, with that same steadiness that had once coaxed her back into the world. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "You know," she said softly, "the worst part of being in a coma wasn't the stillness. It was the awareness, the helplessness. Hearing people make plans over you, talk around you, decide your worth in real time." She paused. "And yet, you never once did that. You talked to me like I mattered, even when I couldn't say a word back." Ethan didn't respond with some perfect line. He just squeezed her hand gently, like a quiet vow. In the months that followed, Avery began to rebuild, not the empire, not the company that now functioned well without her, but herself. She launched the Monroe Foundation quietly, almost anonymously, funding research for patients with disorders of consciousness, supporting families navigating the limbo she knew all too well. Her story was picked up by national media, and she agreed to one interview. When asked what brought her back, she looked straight into the camera and said, "Someone spoke to me like I was still here. That saved me." She and Ethan didn't define what they were in press releases or Instagram captions. They walked in Central Park on Sundays, argued about novels neither of them liked, and sometimes cooked dinner in silence, the good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. It was real and raw and private. But real love, Avery had learned, comes with its own kind of risk. One November evening, Ethan didn't come home. His car had been hit by a truck that ran a red light 2 blocks from the hospital. She arrived at the emergency room to find him conscious but broken. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a long road ahead. For the first time, she sat beside a hospital bed, fingers trembling as she spoke aloud to someone she loved who couldn't answer. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice catching. "Please hear me. You once told me that showing up, even when you don't know what to say, is the most important thing. So I'm here, and I will be here every single day." She talked to him about the seasons again, about how the leaves had fallen just like they did the year she woke up, about how the hospital smell was still awful, but somehow less terrible with him nearby. She read him the same book he once read her excerpts from, even the parts she hated, and every morning she changed the flowers at his bedside. 9 days passed. On the 10th, Ethan opened his eyes. "I heard you," he rasped, voice hoarse, smile slow and crooked. "You read the part with the awful metaphor about sunflowers, and I wanted to scream." Avery laughed and sobbed in the same breath. "You always were dramatic." They never called it even. They never said who saved whom, because in the end, they both had. Not in the grand, cinematic way the public wanted, but in the quiet acts of being present, of refusing to let go. Their wedding was small, just the hospital staff, close friends, and a garden where the first leaves of spring had begun to bloom. Dr. Caroline Trent, ever composed, performed the ceremony again, just as she had once witnessed Avery's first words. This time, the vows were audible, sacred, and simple. Ethan whispered his into Avery's ear, too soft for anyone else to hear. "You brought me back. I just followed your voice home." Years later, long after the press stopped asking and the headlines faded, Avery gave a keynote at a neuroscience conference she secretly funded. As she closed her speech, she looked across the audience and smiled. "Love," she said, "is not always loud. Sometimes it's the whisper you cling to when the world forgets your name." What part of this story touched you the most? And what would you have done in Avery's place? Comment 100 if you love this story. Let us know where you're watching from. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances. And thank you for watching Life Stories.